When President Trump tried to humiliate Jasmine Crockett on live TV, no one expected her calm to cut deeper than any insult. But what she said next turned silence into history. You could feel it before the cameras even started rolling, the kind of heavy tension that hangs in the air when everyone knows something big is about to unfold, but no one is willing to speak it aloud. That it was a Thursday night in Arlington, Texas, and the University Center auditorium was packed. Every seat filled, every breath held. Reporters lined the back walls, cameras humming quietly, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. This wasn't just another political event. It was a live town hall broadcast nationwide on 3 major networks. The theme was bipartisan dialogue, a phrase people loved to use but rarely lived by. On one side of the stage stood President Donald Trump, the American flag behind him, wearing his signature confident smirk. On the other stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, bold, composed, calm. Her posture alone said she was ready for whatever came next. The contrast between them couldn't have been sharper. Trump's energy filled the room like wildfire, loud, unpredictable, demanding attention. Jasmine carried a quiet steadiness. She wasn't trying to match his volume, she wasn't here to perform. She was here to be heard. The moderator, a well-known CBS journalist, opened gently with questions about economic recovery and bipartisan cooperation. Trump answered with the flair he was known for, bravado, humor, and a few sharp edges. The audience chuckled at some of his remarks, but their anticipation was obvious. They weren't here for small talk. They were waiting for the inevitable clash. Jasmine sat patiently, occasionally jotting down notes in a small leather notebook. Her team had warned her, Trump might try to provoke her. "Stay composed," they said. "He feeds off reactions." But Jasmine wasn't new to pressure. Before Congress, she was a public defender. She'd faced angry judges, overwhelmed clients, even threats. This was just another courtroom, except the jury was the entire country. When the moderator finally turned to her, Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her expression calm but intent. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, "you've been vocal about government transparency and accountability. If you could address the president directly on these issues, what would you say?" Millions watched as the camera panned to her. "Mr. President," she said, her voice steady and professional, "the American people deserve clarity. In recent months we've seen policies implemented without explanation, contracts directed toward private interests, and important questions left unanswered. My question is simple: who are these policies serving, the people, or your allies?" A soft wave of gasps moved through the audience. It wasn't an attack. It was direct. It left no easy escape. Trump's jaw tightened. He adjusted his mic and leaned forward. "Jasmine," he said, dragging out her name, "you're talking about things you don't understand. You've been in Congress 2 years? I've been running this country. Maybe you should take notes instead of throwing around accusations." The crowd reacted instantly, laughter, murmurs, scattered applause. Some cheered, others looked uncomfortable. Jasmine didn't flinch. She stayed still, eyes steady. The moderator tried to intervene, but Trump kept going. "This is what happens," he said. "People who complain, 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 but don't accomplish anything. They want to look tough on TV but don't know how to get things done." Phones lifted in the air. Clips were already being uploaded. Social media was buzzing. This wasn't policy anymore. It was personal. Jasmine inhaled slowly. She looked to the moderator, who gave a small encouraging nod. It was her turn. But before she could speak, a woman in the second row whispered, barely audible, "He shouldn't have said that." The sentiment echoed through millions of homes. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about respect. "Mr. President," Jasmine began softly, "I may be newer than you, but integrity doesn't have a learning curve." The audience stirred. She continued, "Public service is about accountability, not arrogance. Leadership isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how honestly you answer." Her words hit the room like a pin dropping in a silent church. Even the moderator froze for a moment. Trump chuckled, brushing it off. That's cute, he said. Did you rehearse that? No, Jasmine replied, unfazed. I lived it. For a split second, something flickered across Trump's face, surprise, maybe discomfort. The cameras caught it. The audience felt it. And viewers across the country leaned in. A shift had happened. But the real storm hadn't hit yet, the crowd was still buzzing from her words. Even those expecting a routine town hall sensed something building, something heavier, sharper. The moderator shuffled his notes nervously, trying to regain control, but the energy in the room had already changed. Trump leaned back, arms crossed, smirk fixed. He was ready to move on. Jasmine wasn't. She straightened her notes, looked to the moderator, and said calmly, I'd like to ask one more question. He hesitated. He knew the risk. But the audience murmured their approval. Producers likely saw the ratings spike and gave the go-ahead, Congresswoman. Jasmine nodded, then turned to Trump. Her tone was unchanged, steady, respectful, but anchored with conviction. Mr. President, she said, the American people have watched billions in emergency funding allocated over the past quarter. Yet many communities are still waiting for basic support, underfunded hospitals, under-resourced schools, and small businesses shutting down every day. You've spoken about putting America first, but it seems America's working class is last in line. So I'll ask you directly, where is that money going? Her words didn't just land, they hit like a hammer. It was a question people all over the country had been asking, at dinner tables, at gas stations, in classrooms, in church halls. It struck a nerve because it was real. Trump's expression hardened, his jaw shifted and he adjusted his microphone. You know, Jasmine, he began, I've heard this before. Every time we try to make progress, there's someone like you trying to stir the pot. We've done more for the economy than any administration in history, especially for people like you. That last phrase landed like a stone, people like you. The crowd reacted instantly. Some gasped, some forced out awkward laughs, but the discomfort swept through the room like a cold draft. The moderator blinked, unsure whether to step in. Trump, unaware or unconcerned that he'd crossed a line, kept talking. I've created opportunities, jobs, business growth, record employment. And what do I get? Complaints. Maybe if Congress spent less time criticizing and more time learning from success, we'd get somewhere. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. She just watched him with a calm, unreadable expression, the kind that unsettles someone not because of anger, but because of absolute control. I in the front row, an older teacher folded her arms, no longer cheering. Behind her, a young man shook his head and whispered, he shouldn't have said that. The moderator cleared his throat. Let's focus on policy, he said, voice trembling slightly. But the cameras were already closing in on Jasmine. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but deliberate. With respect, Mr. President, this isn't about people like me. It's about Americans who feel forgotten. It's about the single mother in Oklahoma working 2 jobs and still unable to afford her child's insulin. It's about the veteran in Nevada waiting 8 months for a disability check. It's about transparency. Because if we can't track where the money goes, how can we trust where it comes from? The room fell silent. Even Trump paused, unsure how to follow that. He opened his mouth, but before he could continue, a ripple of applause broke out. Soft at first, then building. It wasn't partisan, it was human. Jasmine didn't smile. She simply let the sound rise, not as a victory lap but as proof that truth still carried weight. Trump leaned toward the mic. You sound like you're giving a campaign speech, he said sharply. You think you're gonna win votes off me? Good luck. She met his eyes. I'm not campaigning, sir. I'm asking for honesty. The moderator turned to Trump. Mr. President, would you like to respond? He exhaled sharply. Look, we've done incredible things. Incredible. But the problem is people like Congresswoman Crockett don't appreciate success. They want to talk about numbers they don't understand. She's a talker, not a doer. Gasps rippled through the room again. Once, a line like that might have landed as confidence. But tonight it felt bitter, defensive. The audience could sense the imbalance. One person attacking, the other holding steady. In the control room, a producer whispered, "This is blowing up. Check Twitter." Within seconds, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Crockett phases Trump, hashtag town hall moment, hashtag respect matters. But Jasmine wasn't chasing hashtags. She was chasing accountability. She lifted her notes, glanced at the moderator, then said calmly, "I do my work quietly. I just believe leadership speaks louder when it serves others." A pause fell over the room. No one moved. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Trump leaned back, chuckled, and muttered, "You're something else." It wasn't meant as a compliment, but the audience heard it as one. What no one knew then was that her question, this simple line of inquiry, would ignite a national firestorm neither side could control. The next few seconds stretched longer than they should have. Trump's eyes narrowed, the tension between him and Jasmine filling the room like static before a storm. The audience sensed something was about to snap. He leaned closer to the microphone, his tone sharpening. "You know, Jasmine, I've met a lot of people who talk about accountability and transparency, but when it's time to actually do something, they disappear. You stand here talking about numbers, about honesty, but I don't see results. Just another politician pretending to care." His words dripped with sarcasm, each one designed to sting. Some people clapped. Others sat stiffly, watching as if this were a championship match. Jasmine didn't look away. She didn't blink. Her hands rested calmly on the table. The restraint in her posture almost seemed to frustrate him. He noticed. His voice hardened, "You come here talking about forgotten people and struggles, but you're sitting in Washington, aren't you? You have your office, your staff, your perks. Don't tell me you understand the average American better than I do. I built businesses. I created jobs. You created speeches." One corner of the room, mostly supporters in red hats, erupted in applause. But it was uneven, hesitant. The moderator looked uneasy. He glanced between them, unsure whether to intervene. But the exchange had already taken on a life of its own. Trump pushed on. "You say you're fighting for the people, but let's be honest, Congresswoman, you're fighting for attention. You're trying to create a moment here. You want to go viral. Get your headlines. Maybe land a book deal later, who knows?" Trump's words sliced through the room. Even for him, it was unusually sharp. Gasps rose from the crowd. Jasmine's face remained unchanged, calm, unreadable. Her silence made his jab sound smaller, like a shout echoing in a stone chamber. Finally, she spoke, "Mr. President, attention fades. Accountability doesn't." Trump scoffed. "Cute line. You think that's going to save you when the cameras stop rolling?" Jasmine leaned in just slightly, "I don't need saving. I need answers." The crowd murmured. Reporters' pens scratched across notepads. Camera flashes flickered like lightning. Trump's voice rose another notch. "You people always want answers," he said, irritation creeping into his tone. "We're running a country, not a classroom. Maybe if you spent less time criticizing and more time learning how things actually get done, we'd make progress." That phrase, "you people," hit the air like a thrown brick. Whispers rippled immediately. "Did he really just say that?" Someone muttered, "He didn't mean it like that," another said, though even she didn't sound convinced. The moderator cleared his throat, adjusting his tie as discomfort settled across his face. "Mr. President, perhaps we can redirect." Trump waved him off. "No, I'm not finished. I'm tired of being told by people like her how to do my job. I've done more for this country than anyone in that Congress building ever will." The audience didn't clap. Not anymore. They simply watched, some uneasy, some fascinated, but everyone aware the tone had shifted from debate to confrontation. Jasmine leaned toward her microphone, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "Respectfully, sir, this isn't about who's done more. It's about who's doing right." Trump blinked, thrown off. "Doing right?" He let out a short laugh. You sound like a preacher. Maybe you should run a church instead of running your mouth. The words were harsh, harsher than most expected to hear from a president on national television. Gasps cut through the silence, followed by the tense rustling of shifting chairs. Still, Jasmine didn't move. She waited. She let the noise rise, then settle. Mr. President, she said quietly, when leaders mock decency, they weaken the very seat they sit in. This isn't about ego. It's about trust. You can't claim to serve the people while belittling the ones who question you. That's not leadership. That's performance. The audience erupted, not with applause yet, but with murmurs of disbelief and awe. Trump leaned back, his smile faltering. The moderator stepped in quickly, sensing the gravity of the moment. Let's keep the tone respectful, he said, his voice tight. This is an important discussion. But the damage was already done. Trump lifted his water glass, took a slow sip, and muttered into the microphone, unbelievable. Millions watching at home leaned closer to their screens. On social media, commentators dissected every word. Some defended Trump's bluntness, others called Jasmine's composure a master class. Inside the auditorium, none of that mattered. All that mattered was what happened next. Trump shifted in his seat. He wasn't used to someone remaining calm through his barrage. Most people either cracked, lashed out, or backed down. Jasmine did none of those. She stayed rooted, steady, unshaken. The moderator tried again to reset the tone, but silence drowned him out. Not a weak silence, an expectant silence. The kind that comes before moments people never forget. Jasmine was about to turn that quiet into something unmistakable. For a long, suspended breath, no one moved. No one spoke. The audience realized they had just witnessed a line being crossed. Eyes darted between Trump and Jasmine, waiting. Trump leaned back confidently, sipping his water like he'd just wrapped up a winning exchange. He seemed satisfied. Jasmine remained still, composed, calculating. The camera locked onto her, sensing the moment tightening like a coil. Trump set his glass down with a small clink. So, he said, breaking the silence, are we done with the grandstanding? Or do you want to keep pretending you're not reading off a script? A few awkward chuckles came from the back, but they quickly faded. Jasmine looked up slowly. I wasn't aware truth needed a script. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Trump smirked. Oh, it's truth now. Very dramatic. You should be on television. Well, I guess you are. A few claps. A few laughs. But most people stayed silent. They could feel the balance shifting. Jasmine took a breath, eyes steady on him. Mr. President, I didn't come here for television. I came here for answers the public deserves. Trump rolled his eyes. Here we go again. The public. The people. The forgotten. Same speech every time. She tilted her head slightly, almost sympathetically. If you're tired of hearing it, maybe it's because too many of them are still waiting for change. The moderator tried to step in, but Jasmine lifted her hand slightly, not in challenge, but in concentration, as if signaling she wasn't nearly done. The audience leaned forward. Let me remind you, she said, her voice calm but sharpened with purpose, these people aren't numbers on a chart. They're parents, workers, veterans, students. They're the backbone of this country. And when they ask where their money, their trust, and their hope have gone, they deserve more than jokes in response. This time, the silence that followed didn't feel tense. It felt respectful. Trump chuckled, shaking his head. You politicians love talking like that. Acting like you're their savior. I'm not their savior, Jasmine replied. I'm their representative. That's my job. He inhaled as if ready to speak again, but she continued before he could. And if doing that job means making powerful people uncomfortable, then so be it. The room erupted, loud applause, people rising to their feet, genuine cheers mixed with quiet proud claps. Trump's smile slipped. He glanced around the stage, trying to decide whether the reaction was authentic. It was. The moderator raised his voice, struggling to regain control. Let's settle down, please. We still need to get to audience questions. But the mood had already shifted. What began as a predictable political exchange had turned into a test of composure, of character. Jasmine waited for the applause to settle before speaking again. You see, she said, turning toward the moderator, this isn't about disagreement. It's about respect. We can debate policy all night, and that's healthy. But when debate turns into disrespect, we lose something far greater than civility. We lose credibility. Trump leaned toward his microphone. So you're saying I'm not respectful? I've been one of the most respectful presidents this country's ever had. Ask anyone. A few uneasy laughs broke out. Jasmine offered him a patient, almost gentle smile. Respect isn't something you announce, sir. It's something you show. The room murmured. Even the cameraman seemed locked in place. Trump shifted, irritation creeping into his posture. Now you're trying to make this about feelings. People don't want feelings, they want results. Results don't mean much, she replied evenly, if people can't trust the hands delivering them. That line detonated. Applause thundered again, drowning out the moderator's attempts to speak. Staffers exchanged looks, some delighted, some worried, all aware this moment was about to dominate every headline. Trump muttered to an aide, his demeanor noticeably changed, less confident, more defensive. He reached for his mic, but the applause only grew louder. Then Jasmine delivered the line that spun every head in the room. Mr. President, she said, people don't remember who shouted the loudest. They remember who stood their ground the longest. Trump's smirk vanished. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You done? He asked quietly. She met his gaze without blinking. Not until the truth is heard. It was one of those rare moments when the cameras captured more than words, shifts in posture, in energy, in perception. Viewers at home didn't need commentary. They understood. This was a test of control, of character, of the limits of power under pressure, and if that silence marked the turning point, what followed would ignite something far bigger, something no scriptwriter could have invented. The crowd was still standing when the moderator finally signaled for calm. It took nearly half a minute for the applause to fade, and even then the electricity in the room didn't disappear. It hovered, pulsing, every camera locked on Jasmine Crockett. Her name was already trending nationwide, though she had no idea. She wasn't thinking about social media. She was thinking about the people watching from their couches, the ones without a microphone on that stage. Trump shifted again, the irritation sharp in his voice. All right, you've had your fun. You gave your little speech, everyone clapped. Congratulations. Maybe next time you can run the show. Jasmine turned toward him, her expression steady. Mr. President, this isn't about a show. It's about accountability. And the people who trusted you deserve better than insults when they ask for answers. Trump leaned forward, elbows on the table. Oh please. You want to talk insults? I've been insulted every day for 8 years. Fake news, witch hunts, investigations. You think you're going to lecture me about respect? Jasmine didn't flinch. Respect doesn't require silence, she said. It requires standing up when something is wrong. And I think the American people are tired of being told they should be grateful, when gratitude doesn't put food in their refrigerators. The line landed like a punch. The room stirred, murmurs of approval, even from people who had cheered for Trump before. Trump scoffed. Oh, you're real tough, huh? You think you're some kind of hero for talking down to me on live TV? Go ahead, tell everyone how perfect you are. Jasmine shook her head gently. I'm far from perfect. But I do know what it's like to grow up in a house, end of your provided section. Where bills came before comfort, she finished. I know what it's like to fight for the people who don't have a platform. And if that makes me tough, she paused, not for effect, but for honesty. Then I'll take it. The applause returned, not explosive this time, but fuller, deeper, more sincere. That it wasn't entertainment anymore. It was connection. Trump let out a laugh, but almost no humor lived inside it. You know, Jasmine, you sound like a motivational speaker. Maybe that's the career you should have gone into. Politics clearly isn't your strong suit. She gave a small smile, not the smile of someone insulted, but someone who refused to be dragged into a shouting match. Maybe, she said, but at least I try to lift people up, not tear them down. The audience burst into applause again, louder now, more confident. The moderator attempted to regain control, but every attempt was swallowed by the noise. Trump tugged at his tie, irritation creeping through his composure. You're very proud of yourself, aren't you? Pride isn't the point, Jasmine said evenly. Integrity is. And it shouldn't be controversial to say that leadership begins with empathy. A woman in the front row rose, clapping alone. Then another joined her. Within seconds, half the room was standing again, something that no longer felt partisan, that it felt human. Trump swept his eyes across the crowd, clearly frustrated. All right, he said into the mic, you all want to cheer. Go ahead. But when you're paying higher taxes and losing your jobs, don't come crying to me. Jasmine inhaled softly, her gaze locked on his. That's the thing, Mr. President, the people aren't crying to you. They're crying for you. Because they still believe you could do the right thing, if you listened instead of fought. The entire auditorium froze, even the moderator stopped moving. That line hit deeper than anyone expected. Trump blinked, a rare moment where his expression blanked completely. He looked like he wanted to fire back, but no words arrived. The camera zoomed in, catching every subtle detail. The split-second pause, the flick of surprise in his eyes, the tightening of his fingers around the table's edge. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low and steady. You have power that most people will never touch. And they trusted you with it. But power without humility? She let the word settle. That's not strength. That's fear wearing a suit. A stunned hush flooded the auditorium, and then, slowly, a wave. People rose from their seats again, this time without hesitation. The applause thundered, emotional and overwhelming. Even reporters paused, hands hovering above their keyboards, absorbing the moment rather than documenting it. Trump leaned back, his expression unreadable, his eyes darting toward the cameras. For once, he didn't interrupt. He didn't cut in. He didn't try to reclaim the stage. He just sat with it, though everyone could see how much he resented the silence. Jasmine didn't smirk. She didn't celebrate. She looked down at her notes briefly, then back to the crowd. We can disagree on policy, she said, but we shouldn't disagree on dignity. The moderator finally found his voice, shaky, measured. All right, let's, take a moment before moving on to audience questions. But truthfully, no one cared about the questions anymore. What they came for had already happened. They had witnessed something unfiltered, ego clashing with principle, and a woman who refused to shrink under pressure. Across the country, millions replayed the clip within minutes, tweets, captions, posts. This is what leadership looks like. But this was only the beginning. After a short commercial break, everything felt different in the auditorium. The tension hadn't faded, it had sharpened. People weren't restless anymore, they were riveted. Cameras glided past faces, some smiling, some troubled, all aware they just witnessed a cultural moment. Jasmine Crockett sat calmly, her posture loose, hands folded lightly on the table. In contrast, Trump looked like a man trying to reassemble his footing. His jaw was tight, his stare rigid. Behind him, aides exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the viral clip had already escaped the room. The moderator steadied himself. We're back, he said. And before we take questions, I think it's important to acknowledge what we just saw. This is democracy, strong opinions, tough questions, passion on both sides. Trump forced a thin smile. Passion, he said, sure. But I call it grandstanding. A few scattered chuckles surfaced, but they didn't travel far. The room had changed too much. Standing up for the truth isn't grandstanding, Jasmine replied simply. It's leadership. The moderator gestured to a young woman in the third row. She stood, gripping the microphone, nervous but determined. Mr. President, she began, my husband's a truck driver. We've been struggling with rising fuel costs and healthcare bills. I voted for you twice. But I'd like to know why we haven't seen the relief you promised. The room tightened again. Trump straightened. Ready, look, sweetheart, he said. We've done more for truckers and working families than anyone. Gas prices are down compared to when other people were in charge. Healthcare, we're fixing it. You just have to give it time. The woman frowned. It's been years, sir. Trump hesitated. Just a second. Well, it takes time, okay? The economy was wrecked by the people before me. We've done an amazing job rebuilding it. Jasmine didn't interrupt, but her expression spoke volumes. She waited until the moderator turned toward her. Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to respond? Yes, she said softly. Then she looked back at the woman in the audience. Ma'am, thank you for your question. You shouldn't have to wait years for relief. You shouldn't have to choose between paying for gas and paying for medicine. That's not patience, that's pain. And our government should never expect families to bear that burden in silence. The room fell quiet once more, then a wave of applause rolled through the auditorium. Slow at first, then growing with steady emotion. The woman who'd asked the question nodded, visibly moved. Trump leaned back, irritation clear in the rhythm of his fingers tapping against the table. Another audience member stood, a man with a "Veterans for Trump" pin gleaming on his jacket. I'm a lifelong conservative, he said, voice firm. And I've supported you, Mr. President. But tonight, I think the Congresswoman makes a fair point. We want strength, yes. But we also want empathy. That's not weakness. That's decency. The room burst into applause yet again, louder, fuller. Even the moderator looked momentarily stunned. Trump's lips tightened as he forced a laugh. Well, I appreciate that, he said, sarcasm dripping. Lots of feelings in here tonight. Jasmine glanced his way. Maybe feelings are exactly what we've been missing, she replied. Numbers don't cry when they lose their homes. People do. Clapping erupted again, some people rising to their feet. Cameras captured close-ups of faces nodding, smiling, whispering. The shift in the room was unmistakable. Trump had entered with full command of the stage. Jasmine now held the moral center. In the control booth, producers whispered urgently, it's blowing up online. One said, clips are everywhere, TikTok, YouTube, X. She's trending in all regions. By the time the next audience question arrived, the momentum had completely shifted. A young veteran asked about mental health programs. Trump answered with familiar talking points, rehearsed, distant, filled with the usual superlatives about doing more than anyone before. But when Jasmine responded, she didn't cite numbers, she told a story. I met a veteran in El Paso, she began. He told me the hardest part wasn't the battlefield, it was coming home and feeling forgotten. He didn't need speeches or parades. He needed someone to pick up the phone when he called for help. Eyes across the room glistened. The young veteran who had asked the question lowered his gaze, swallowing hard. Trump opened his mouth to reply, then stopped. Anything he said at that moment would sound small. The moderator took a breath and announced, we're out of time. I want to thank both of you for being here tonight. The audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation, a rare occurrence at events like this. But what was striking wasn't who they were clapping for. It was what they were clapping for: decency. Humanity. Accountability. Trump gave a quick wave, exiting the stage swiftly, flanked by aides. Jasmine lingered, not to bask, but to thank the moderator and greet a few audience members with quiet humility. She carried herself with the calm of someone who understood the night was not about glory, it was about truth landing exactly where it needed to. But as the cameras faded to black, the real storm was only beginning. The moment the footage hit the internet, the story grew wings. By sunrise, the world had already decided. Clips from the Arlington town hall appeared everywhere. On social platforms, Jasmine Crockett's name shot to the top of trending lists, just above a booming tag, Trump meltdown. Cable networks replayed the same 30-second clip relentlessly. Jasmine's steady stare, Trump's flustered tone, and that now iconic line, power without humility is fear wearing a suit. It was everywhere. By morning, major networks interrupted their scheduled programming to analyze the confrontation. Pundits broke down every syllable, every expression, every pause. Conservative voices called her disrespectful, accusing her of grandstanding. but others, including some from Trump's traditional base, admitted she displayed a composure that felt fresh in a political landscape long exhausted by chaos across the country. Ordinary people chimed in a diner in Kansas, in a barbershop in Ohio. On a morning radio show in Florida, some praised her for confronting power without losing her temper. Others argued she had stepped too far, but no one denied she had seized the moment, and perhaps something far more potent, the narrative. In a small Dallas apartment, a young teacher named Erica watched the clip over coffee and whispered, "Finally, someone who doesn't back down." In Detroit, a retired veteran named Carl shook his head at his TV. She handled him better than most of his rivals ever did. Late-night hosts aired segments titled The Crockett Shock and When Calm Beats Chaos. Inside the White House, however, tension was thick. Trump's communications team had been awake all night drafting statements. By morning, an official press release accused Crockett of staging a political ambush and disrespecting the office of the presidency. But the statement fell flat. It sounded defensive, nervous. Even when asked by reporters if he regretted his words, Trump smirked. "Regret? No. I don't regret telling the truth." She was grandstanding, and the media ate it up. Classic. But underneath the bravado, irritation simmered. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett walked through the Capitol halls as photographers trailed her every step. "Congresswoman, any response to the president's remarks?" reporters called. She paused, offering a faint, calm smile. "I think the exchange spoke for itself. I just hope the conversation now shifts to the real issues, not the noise." Her staff advised her to lay low. "Let the moment breathe," her chief of staff said, but silence was never the plan. Jasmine knew moments only mattered if you turned them into momentum. That afternoon, she appeared on MSNBC. The host, a seasoned journalist, leaned forward and asked, "Congresswoman, what were you thinking in that moment?" When the president made that comment, Jasmine paused. "I was thinking," she told the interviewer, "about how many people face that same tone every single day. People who speak up and get talked down to just for asking fair, reasonable questions. I wasn't angry. I just didn't want to be another person who let it slide." The clip exploded online in minutes. Viewers called it poise under pressure. One user wrote, "She never raised her voice once, and somehow she said everything." The backlash came just as fast. Conservative radio hosts accused her of playing the victim. Others labeled her the left's latest poster child. That night, Trump jumped onto his social media platform. "Jasmine Crockett equals fake class," she read off a teleprompter. "No substance, just attitude. Sad." The post racked up millions of interactions, some outraged, some entertained, but instead of dying down, the attention surged. Hashtags like #CrockettClapback, #RespectInPolitics, and #FearWearingAsuit flooded feeds across the internet. A clip of a little girl in Baltimore watching Jasmine's speech with her mother went viral too. The girl pointed at the screen and said, "She talks like us." CNN reporters set up outside the University Center in Dallas, where the town hall had taken place. They interviewed people who had been in the audience. One man in a baseball cap said, "I came here a Trump supporter. I still am. But I'll tell you this, that lady didn't lose her cool, and that meant something. I respect that." By the third day, what had begun as a heated exchange had turned into something larger. Universities played the footage in political science classes. Commentators called it a watershed moment in the national conversation about tone in politics. Even international networks, BBC, Al Jazeera, aired segments about what they dubbed the Crockett effect. Through all of it, Jasmine stayed silent online. No hashtags. No retweets. No clever quotes. When a journalist asked her why, she smiled. "Because the moment doesn't need me to repeat it," she said. "It needs people to remember it." Behind the scenes, her office was drowning in invitations, advocacy groups. Women's organizations, educators, youth summits. One email read simply, "You didn't just answer back. You answered for all of us." But rising admiration brought rising pressure. Some political strategists whispered she might be the future face of her party. Others warned she'd better tread carefully. Jasmine wasn't thinking about fame, she was thinking about what came next, because the storm she'd stirred wasn't fading. It was gathering. 3 days after the town hall, Washington felt different. Reporters clustered tighter in Capitol hallways. Late-night hosts carved out entire segments across cafes. Taxis, elevator rides, everyone was still dissecting what happened in Arlington. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just part of the news cycle anymore, she was the news cycle. Her office phone had rung non-stop since sunrise. Invitations arrived from universities, community groups, civic organizations, high school debate teams emailed, asking her to speak to their students. A women's shelter in Baltimore wrote to say thank you for standing tall when someone tried to talk her down, but Jasmine kept her feet planted firmly on the ground. She was at her desk that morning, reviewing notes for an upcoming committee hearing, when her communications director, Malika, walked in holding a stack of printed headlines. "You're everywhere," Malika said as she placed them on the desk. "Every paper. Every site. The New York Times called you the voice that wouldn't shake. And Fox ran a whole panel debating whether you embarrassed the president or just made good TV." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, smiling faintly. "Well," she said, "if they can't decide which one it was, maybe that means we hit the right nerve." Malika nodded, though her expression tightened. "You've also got some, less friendly coverage. They're calling you divisive. Disrespectful. You know, the usual labels. Want us to respond?" Jasmine shook her head. "No. Let them talk. I said what needed to be said." Her phone buzzed again, another interview request, this time from a national morning show. She ignored it. What she needed wasn't more cameras, she needed clarity. That afternoon, she gathered her staff in the conference room. Sunlight poured through half-closed blinds, streaking the polished table. "We're not turning this into a PR tour," Jasmine began. "I don't want a moment to become a brand. I want it to mean something." Peter, a senior advisor, looked up from his laptop. "Congresswoman, you've started something. People are listening. You could use this momentum, ethics reform, a transparency bill, strike while it's fresh." She nodded slowly. "Yes. But it has to come from integrity, not attention. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." Later that evening, as the Capitol lights glowed against the night sky, Jasmine drove home in silence. Her phone buzzed constantly, alerts, op-eds, invitations, praise, criticism, none of which she opened. She wasn't chasing the noise, she was preparing for whatever came next. The night air outside was thick with spring humidity, and all Jasmine wanted was a moment of stillness. When she finally reached her apartment, she sank onto the couch and flicked on the TV. The very first thing that appeared on the screen was a replay of the town hall, Trump's tight expression, her unwavering gaze, the ripple of reaction from the crowd. It looped over and over, but this time, she wasn't watching as the woman in the spotlight, she was watching as a witness. On the broadcast, analysts had been invited to dissect the moment. A political historian said, "It's not that she shouted him down, it's that she didn't." That restraint changed the entire perception. She didn't fight fire with fire. She made fire look foolish. Another commentator added, "It's rare to see grace win in real time." Jasmine muted the sound. She wasn't searching for compliments. What she heard beneath all the commentary was something else. People were starving for something genuine. Meanwhile, at the White House, aides were scrambling to redirect the narrative. Trump's team tried to push economic announcements, but every time they attempted to pivot, reporters dragged them back to one question: "Do you plan to apologize for your tone?" Trump waved it away. "No one's owed an apology. I'm the most respectful person you'll ever meet." She was just being dramatic. But the damage had already taken root, even in his loyal base. Small fractures began to show. One conservative columnist wrote, "You can disagree with her policies, but you can't deny she carried herself with dignity, and that's something every leader should learn from." Back in Texas, the auditorium where it all unfolded had turned into a kind of landmark. Students filmed TikToks reenacting Jasmine's calm, famous line. Local news interviewed janitors, camera operators, even the sound technician. Everyone had their own story about the night everything shifted. Jasmine's team remained cautious. "The same media that lifts you up," Malika warned, "will look for any excuse to pull you down." "I know," Jasmine replied. "That's why we keep our eyes on the people, not the cameras." A few nights later, she accepted an invitation to appear on a late-night news panel. Not to relive the confrontation, but to talk about ethics, leadership, and trust in government. The host opened the segment with, "Congresswoman, after all that's happened, what's your biggest takeaway?" Jasmine took a moment, then said, "That power doesn't define character. Character defines power, and sometimes you have to lose your cool in someone else's story to keep your truth in your own." The studio fell silent. Finally the host whispered, "That's going to stay with people." "I hope it does," she replied. When she returned home that night, her phone buzzed once more, this time with a message from her mother. "Your grandmother would have been proud." Jasmine set the phone aside and, for the first time all week, let herself breathe. Yes, the storm had brought noise, criticism, and chaos, but beneath it all, there was clarity, and yet the story was far from finished. What came next would reshape her career, her reputation, and perhaps even the political landscape itself. By the end of the week, the exchange between Jasmine Crockett and President Trump had grown into more than a viral clip. It had sparked a nationwide conversation, not just about politics, but about tone, respect, and what leadership should look like. Cable news still played the clip daily, but now the focus had shifted. People weren't asking who won. They were asking what it meant. Professors broke it down in communication classes, pastors quoted her words in sermons, editorial boards used it to challenge modern leadership norms. In Columbus, a protester held up a sign reading, "Power without humility is fear wearing a suit." The phrase took on a life of its own, printed on shirts, stickers, murals. A photo went viral showing a group of high school girls standing proudly in front of their library holding a banner painted with those same words. Meanwhile, in Washington, Jasmine tried to stick to her usual routine, arriving early, staying late, avoiding the spotlight. Her staff couldn't help but notice the messages pouring in from people who'd never before been engaged in politics, veterans, nurses, single parents, all saying, "You made us feel seen." But with every wave of support came another wave of pushback. Trump allies labeled her the media's new darling. Commentators accused her of capitalizing on identity. Online trolls flooded her inbox with vitriol. Still, Jasmine refused to respond in anger. "Let them scream," she told her team. "I'll keep working." That same day, she received an invitation to testify before the House Committee on Government Oversight. The hearing was focused on ethics and executive decision-making, a topic she understood all too well. Her staff urged her to stay neutral, to avoid referencing the town hall, but Jasmine knew that sometimes the personal and the political simply could not be separated. When she stepped into the committee room, it was packed. Reporters filled every seat, cameras trained on her every movement. She adjusted the microphone, fully aware of the eyes on her, and didn't flinch. Transparency. She began by saying that transparency isn't a partisan issue, it's a moral one. And if leaders wanted the public's trust, they had to earn it, not demand it. Her words were intentional, but her delivery was warm, never confrontational. She spoke about the danger of arrogance in high office, about the responsibility of humility for anyone who holds power. She never once said the president's name, yet every person in that room knew exactly who she meant. Across the aisle, one congressman muttered, "She's grandstanding again." But the colleague beside him quietly replied, "She's not wrong." That speech aired in full on the evening news. Commentators called it measured, mature, and surprisingly bipartisan. Even a conservative editorial board wrote, "Her poise is exactly what Washington is starving for right now." Meanwhile, Trump, clearly irritated by the media's fixation on her, doubled down at a White House press conference. "I don't even know who that woman is," he said. "She got lucky off a sound bite. Let's see her actually accomplish something." The next morning, Jasmine's office issued a statement, just one line, "Challenge accepted." Within 2 weeks, she introduced a bipartisan ethics bill requiring full disclosure of executive contracts and government spending. It wasn't glamorous, but it was gutsy, and it gained traction faster than anyone expected. A handful of moderate Republicans even joined as co-sponsors. Reporters started calling it the Crockett Credibility Act, and suddenly, the narrative shifted again. She wasn't the congresswoman who clapped back on national TV, she was the congresswoman who kept her word. At a town hall in San Antonio, with nearly 1,000 people crowded into a gym, she said, "I didn't go viral to become famous. I went viral because I refused to stay silent when respect was on the line. But now that you've heard me, let's get to work." Applause thundered through the room. Some people cheered her name, others simply stood in quiet acknowledgement. among them was an elderly woman holding a sign that read, "Thank you for not yelling." Later that night, a journalist asked, "Do you think that moment changed your career?" Jasmine gave a thoughtful smile. "No," she said. "It reminded me why I started it." Over the next month, her approval ratings climbed steadily. Cable networks began referring to her as one of the most recognizable figures in modern politics. Invitations rolled in from universities and global panels, but Jasmine stayed focused on the work. When asked how she felt about the president continuing to mock her, she laughed softly. "He can say whatever he wants," she replied. "I'm busy building what lasts longer than headlines, trust." By midsummer, her bill passed the House with overwhelming support. Even a few of Trump's allies voted quietly in favor, knowing how bad it would look if they didn't. Jasmine didn't celebrate in front of cameras, but her staff found her in her office that night, sitting alone, gazing out at the Capitol dome. "You did it," Malika said quietly. Jasmine shook her head. "No," she said. "We did. The people did." Outside, the city glowed. The same city that once doubted her now echoing her words back at itself. Power hadn't changed her, she had changed the rhythm of power, but her story wasn't going to end with one successful bill, because the true test of leadership isn't how people cheer for you. It's what happens when they challenge what you stand for. Autumn settled gently over Washington, the leaves along Constitution Avenue turned gold, and the air softened after months of political heat. Reporters had moved on to new scandals, new outrages. The political cycle spun forward as it always does, but life for Jasmine Crockett hadn't returned to its old rhythm. Something had shifted permanently. Her office was busier than ever. Constituents stopped by not just for photos, but to tell their stories. A nurse from Tucson said that Jasmine's calm that night gave her the courage to demand fair pay at her hospital. A teenager from Des Moines said she played the clip in her civics class, because it proved that calm can win. A small-town mayor from Idaho wrote, "Your composure reminded me why I first ran for office." Those were the moments that mattered most to Jasmine, proof that dignity still had impact. She received invitations to appear on major talk shows, to write a book, to participate in a documentary, but she declined most of them. "I don't want to be remembered for a viral clip," she told Malika. "I want to be remembered for what we built after it." She spent the next weeks traveling across the country, not for campaigning, but for conversations. She met with farmers in Kansas worried about rising costs, veterans in Nevada struggling with healthcare delays, teachers in Indiana stretched thin. Everywhere she went, people mentioned that town hall, usually in the same breath as their frustrations. One night in Phoenix, she sat in a folding chair inside a small community center filled with local residents. A man in his 60s raised his hand. "Congresswoman," he said, "that night, when he tried to tear you down, how did you stay calm? I would have lost it." Jasmine folded her hands gently in her lap, "Because losing it," she said, "wouldn't have helped the people I was there to represent." She told him that anger burns quickly, but composure builds something. That it shows people that even under fire, you still believe the truth is worth standing in. For a moment, the room fell still, then came applause. Not loud or wild, but steady, the kind of applause that rises from understanding, not excitement. When she returned to Washington that weekend, Malika met her at the door with another stack of letters. One envelope stood out, cream-colored, written in neat cursive. Inside was a note from a retired schoolteacher in Vermont. "Thank you for reminding us that strength doesn't have to roar, sometimes it just refuses to bow." Jasmine sat quietly after reading it, watching the afternoon light spill across her desk. Later that evening, she accepted one last interview request. A small local station back in her district. The host wasn't famous, just a young reporter trying to make her mark. Jasmine appreciated that. The interviewer leaned forward. "Congresswoman, after all these months, what do you think that moment taught people?" Jasmine paused, then answered softly, "That decency still matters. That we're used to shouting matches. That we've gotten comfortable watching people win by tearing others down. But sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stay calm, refuse to meet disrespect with more disrespect. That's how you change the temperature in the room." The host nodded. "Do you think it changed you?" Jasmine offered a faint smile. "No. It reminded me of who I already was." That line would later appear as the closing quote in countless articles and broadcasts about her. But in that moment, she wasn't thinking about the media, she was thinking about her grandmother, a woman who used to say, "Don't raise your voice. Raise your value." After the cameras shut off, Jasmine stepped outside into the cool evening air. the streets were quiet, city lights shimmering across the Potomac. She stood still for a moment, letting the calm settle around her. A passing car slowed, and a man leaned out the window. "Keep speaking truth, Congresswoman." She smiled and waved, then walked toward her car. Later that night, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, scrolling through messages. One video stopped her, a classroom of 8th graders reciting her famous line in unison: "Power without humility is fear wearing a suit." Their teacher captioned it, "We're studying leadership. They chose you." Jasmine covered her mouth, laughing softly in disbelief. It was humbling, surreal even, to see how far the echo of one calm night had traveled. As midnight approached, she closed her laptop and whispered, "Stay grounded. Stay kind. Stay ready." Because she knew this wasn't the end of her story. The next time she was challenged, on policy, on principle, or on a national stage, she'd meet it exactly the same way, calm, steady, unafraid. Her rise hadn't come from shouting the loudest or fighting the dirtiest. It came from the simple truth that respect, held steady under fire, becomes its own quiet revolution. Before bed, she opened her notebook to the page she'd carried with her that night in Arlington and wrote one final line: "Sometimes grace speaks louder than power." She closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the silence of her apartment fill the room, not with pressure this time, but with peace. And that became her legacy, that real strength isn't about who commands the room, but who refuses to lose their humanity inside it. If this story moved you, remember, grace, honesty, and courage still matter. Subscribe for more stories about truth under fire and the people brave enough to stand in it.